Start recording here. Okay, we're recording. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Mahoney. I am with the Greater Hartford chapter of SCOR. Welcome to our webinar today. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Marty Clayman from the same chapter of SCOR. Marty's going to tell you all about the best advice and tips for starting a new business. We provide a lot of mentoring services for clients, and a lot of times folks have a hard time navigating where to start and what to do. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. The session is being recorded. We'll offer up a video of the recording afterwards if you'd like to revisit any of the material. We're also, all of your microphones have been muted to start so we could minimize background noise. Most importantly, we'd love to hear your questions throughout the session. We'll probably take them at the end as well, but if you have questions, you can put them in the chat section at the bottom of your screen. There should be a chat button, and you can just type in your question, and I'll keep an eye on those as we go through the presentation. Before we jump in, I thought I'd spend just a minute and tell you a little bit about SCOR. Marty and I are both part of the Greater Hartford chapter, but SCOR is a nationwide organization of about 10,000 volunteers, and our sole mission every day is to help small business owners start their businesses and grow their businesses. We provide a number of services, primarily one-on-one mentoring. We also offer workshops and webinars much like this one. And we also have a wealth of resources of information on our website where you can find information to help in any variety of topics. And you can also sign up for mentoring services. Our website is at scor.org. And you can select the sign up for mentoring services section if you're interested in that. We've got mentors from all walks of life, small business owners, corporate experience, anything from legal to finance to marketing to operations. If you need help in something, we can most likely help you with it. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Marty, and I'm going to share his presentation, and then we'll get started.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate that. As Steve said, I'm Marty Clayman. And just a brief few moments about my background and experience. I'm a retired lawyer. I practiced law for 55 years or maybe more in the Hartford area. And for the most part, my area of law was commercial, involving startup companies and representing companies big and small, medium, large, multinational. They pretty much the gamut over the years, and I also engaged in commercial litigation for all those years. And then I also am an arbitrator with the American Arbitration Association, so I handle a number of cases of any type of commercial case. Franchise cases, I've handled dozens of them, and lately, I've been doing a lot of cases involving motor vehicles, people with who've totaled their vehicles, working with the insurance commissioner of the state of Connecticut, which is how I got involved with that. I've been a SCOR mentor for the last 3 years or so, and the chapter I've been affiliated with is the West Hartford chapter, but we haven't had face-to-face conferences since we've had COVID-19. So I'd like to share with you the tips that I could help you, that might help you for those of you who are interested in forming a new company, starting up a new business. I know that starting a business can be a daunting task because I've mentored now, as I said, for the last 3 years, and most of the people who come to see me are people who want to start a new business, and they're always worried about what have I forgotten, what didn't I do, what should I have done, I'm having trouble with this, I'm having trouble with that. So this is kind of the reason why I thought maybe these tips might be helpful to you attendees to help you start your business and maybe avoid some of the pitfalls and problems that other of my clients have gotten themselves into. So Steve, if you could put up the first slide. The first tip I wanted to give you has to do with something that's very elementary and basic. everybody who wants to start a business comes up with some type of a trade name. And usually people sit around the table or they dream it up on their own. They think they've got a great name, something nifty. And when I use the word trade name, I'm not talking about your own name. Many people do start their business under their own name. Will use the name John Jones. So John Jones Fitness Training could be a company. So we're not talking so much about that. I'm talking about the fictitious names, the assumed names, the ones that you make up. And when you do that, most people have absolutely no idea if maybe somebody else in another part of the state is using the identical name. And maybe that person has a trademark, and maybe that person has protection for that name. So the recommendation I have is that before you register your business, and by the way, the Secretary of State only cares about whether or not the name you selected for your company conflicts exactly with some other name. I had a client that was a leasing company, and the name of it was Equity Leasing Corp. And they ran into financial trouble, legal trouble, and they decided they were going to abandon that name because they didn't want the creditors to come after them. So they asked me what I could do. They didn't really want to change the name that much. So I said, why don't you use Equity Leasing 2, Roman numeral 2. So they filed a new corporation called Equity Leasing Roman numeral 2, INC, and the Secretary of State accepted it because it wasn't the same as Equity Leasing INC. That's all they care about at the Secretary of State, that it's not a duplication of name. So what I recommend you do is you go online to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and click on trademarks. There are trademarks, there are patents, but you're looking for trademarks. And then all you have to do is put in the name, the assumed name that you have selected. Either a name will come up or it won't. Now, if the name comes up and it says active, then that's an active trademark, a federal trademark. And it's possible that if you continue to use that name, the owner of that name will come after you with a cease and desist order. So you go on to the next name that you might select until you find a name where there's no conflict. So that takes care of federal trademarks. We also happen to have a state trademark office affiliated with the Secretary of State's office. And you can go online and you can also likewise put in the name. It's a little bit easier, I think, once you find the trademark division. Put in the name, and if they may reject it and say, no, somebody has that name, or fortunately, if it's clear, then you can go ahead. So with that type of search, it's not bulletproof. It's not that something can't go wrong, but the likelihood of running into a problem with your name is very remote at that point. And then you can go ahead and file your corporate name or your LLC name as the case may be. So that's tip one. We can talk, if we can see the slide on tip 2, go on to the next one. This also basically relates to names again, only this is a little bit different. Again, you don't have a problem if you operate a business under your own name. John Jones Fitness Center, something that I mentioned to you before. Well, if you're John Jones and it's a fitness center, then you're in the clear. You don't have to think any further about that name. You're able to use it without any problem. But if you decide to use an assumed name, then it changes the equation. So supposing you decide you want to use an assumed name, your father's mustache. It's a barbershop that you're going to open up, and it's called your father's mustache. So now you are John Jones, DBA, doing business as your father's mustache. You are required, this is not optional, you are required before you can conduct your business under your father's mustache, the assumed name, to file a certificate of trade name with the town clerk in the town in which you conduct your business. It's a very simple form. A lot of times you can find them online. I know that some towns have them online and some do not. If the town does not, you may have to go to the town clerk's office or call up. They might even be willing to mail it to you. It's a simple form, about a page long, and you put down the necessary information. Now, you could be operating an entity under an assumed name as well. So if you're ABC Company, DBA, your ABC LLC, excuse me, DBA, your father's mustache, you still have to file an assumed name certificate. If you're a corporation, an LLC, or an individual, and you're operating under an assumed name, and I'm not talking about the LLC name or the corporate name, because those are not assumed names. Those are actual names that you file with the Secretary of State. You don't file the assumed name with the Secretary of State, but you do file in the town clerk's office where your business is located. The fee is modest. I'm going to say, call it somewhere between $10 to $20. It's a one-time fee. There are no annual filings. There's nothing more you have to do once you have filed that name with the town clerk. The reason for this being so important is that when someone operates under an assumed name, the consuming public has no idea who is behind that name, who owns it, who is the one who is responsible if something goes wrong. If you have a claim against a retailer or a manufacturer or a wholesaler using an assumed name, then the consumer has a right to file a lawsuit. You can't file a lawsuit if you against an assumed name. You have to file it against the owner of the assumed name. So this is very important, and the state law requires that you file that certificate. It's so important that if you fail to do so, it is possible you could subject yourself to a fine of up to $500, and they even mention up to a year in jail, which sounds pretty harsh to me, but there it is in our state law. And so I would be very, very careful about that situation and make sure you file your certificate of trade name with the town clerk in the town in which your company is conducting business. Next,
Marty, this is commonly where folks will look at the concept of a DBA, right, or a doing business as. Yes, it usually is a DBA, but sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that they have to file their LLC name because it sounds like an assumed name, but it really isn't, because an LLC is what is known in the legal circles as sui generis. It can sue and be sued. It's just like it's an individual. So if you have, that's why I say the ABC LLC, well, it sounds like an assumed name, but it isn't. If you file it with the Secretary of State and then you have your file DBA, your father's mustache, it's your father's mustache that is the assumed name, not the LLC or the corporation. Great. I hope that clarifies. Okay, so the next thing that I think people worry about a lot, because I get this a lot, is do I need a license or a permit to operate my business? And a lot of times I can't really answer that question directly, because there is in Connecticut a Department of Consumer Protection, and the Department of Consumer Protection, among other things, regulates licenses and permits of many businesses that are required by state law to be licensed. So if you're in the plumbing and heating business, you better have a license. And it may turn out that the Department of Consumer Protection will regulate that licensure or that permit, or it may be a different statute that might do that. The best way to explain that is if you're a professional person, a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, an architect, an accountant, there are other agencies in the state that will govern and regulate those professions. So as a lawyer, there's a whole bunch of statutes relating to the licensing of an attorney. You just can't go out and hang up a shingle and say, I'm a lawyer. You have to go through law school. You have to pass a bar examination.
and then you have to get your license, and then you can practice law. That's just as an example. The Department of Consumer Protection, you might find if you're a real estate agent, that might come under the Department of Consumer Protection. Liquor stores are definitely come under the Department of Consumer Protection. If you want to open a liquor store, you have to get a liquor permit. Home improvement contractors, so many outfits out there are home improvement contractors. They seal driveways, they install driveways, they do painting. Anything of that nature actually is home improvement, and there are requirements, and you have to be licensed in order to be able to perform those responsibilities as a home improvement contractor. And it's well worth it to find out if you're doing anything relating to home construction or home repair, home renovation, to get a hold of go online to the Department of Consumer Protection. And you will find it. You'll just have to go, you can Google it, and you'll find Department of Consumer Protection license and permits, and you'll be able to navigate that to get to the point, and you'll find that there is when you get there, that the types of licenses and permits are alphabetized from A to Z, and you look for, let's say, home improvement contractor under obviously the letter H, and let's say you're let me just think, a health club. I may have not mentioned that before, but if you're a health club or a fitness center, you'll find it under the appropriate alphabet excuse me, letter in the alphabet. That takes us through tip 3. We can go to tip 4. Okay, this is another tip that is, I have had so many clients come to me and say, well, Marty, I've got my LLC, I've got my federal tax ID number. I talked to my accountant said to get an EIN. I'm all set to go. And then I would ask the client, well, how many members are there in your LLC? Oh, just me. And how many employees? Well, just me. I'm doing consulting work. I have no employees. So I said, so why do you have an EIN number? Well, I was told I had to have an EIN number to start business. Well, in reality, that is not the case. And it creates a lot of confusion. EIN numbers are required for corporations. All corporations have to have an EIN number. And not all LLCs, however, have to have EIN numbers, and certainly sole proprietors. If you're just operating under your own name, no entity whatsoever, you're going to use your Social Security number. You're not going to get an EIN number. And the Social Security number will be utilized for your tax return. And what you would do if you're a sole proprietor or a single member LLC is you file what is known as Schedule C, and you attach Schedule C to your 1040. And Schedule C is going to have all the business data, all the income, all the expenses, and your profit or your loss. And all that information will be incorporated into Schedule C. So what the government says about sole members of LLCs that have no employees is that it is what is known as a disregarded entity, i.e. it gets disregarded as a corporate entity or a partnership. It's just as though you were a sole proprietorship operating from the standpoint of the federal government. Now, why is going through all this trouble about distinguishing between EIN and Social Security numbers? Well, I'll tell you, it comes out of your pocket if you have an EIN number unnecessarily. How does it come out of your pocket? Because your LLC will have to file a separate federal and state tax return. And unless you are very knowledgeable about taxes or have had experience in filling out tax forms, you're in a position where you're going to have to hire an accountant, and the accountant will charge you anywhere between $500 and maybe $1,000, depending on the complexity, to file these tax returns. So what a waste. So I tell people, don't bother with a federal EIN as long as you are a sole member and you have no employees. As soon as you hire an employee, or as soon as there are multiple members of your LLC, you will then need to get an EIN, and then you'll either have you'll work it out with your accountant. I'm not an accountant as to how you do it, but you will then be filing, you'll then have to have an EIN, and you'll be filing those tax returns that I mentioned to you. So that's perhaps going to eliminate an expense for a lot of people who just don't have any knowledge about the situation. Okay, we can go on to tip 5. This has to do with not a requirement per se, but the high importance of multiple member LLCs adopting a written operating agreement. So let's first of all, before I go further into that topic, talk about corporations. There aren't that many corporations these days because the LLC has become the entity of choice. There are fewer formalities. It's less expensive to incorporate. You don't have to have annual shareholders meetings. You don't have to really get involved with corporate resolutions all the time, although they're effective and make a lot of sense if it's important. If you're going to adopt something very important, it's always a good idea to have a record of what you've done and the vote, especially if you have multiple members. But the corporations, you have to file a certificate of incorporation, just like you have to file a certificate of organization for an LLC. And what people oftentimes do not understand, that corporations, in order to, corporations will be considered to be valid and legal from the standpoint of the Secretary of State. But if you don't have bylaws that that regulate the conduct of the officers, the directors, and the shareholders, you're liable to find yourself in a muddle as time goes on, and you have, let's say, a number of shareholders, and somebody is fighting over what type of vote there should be. Is it supposed to be unanimous, or should there be a majority vote, or should there be a supermajority vote? What do we do about transferring an interest? Somebody says, well, I want to sell my interest in the corporation to a friend of mine. And you say, no, you're here. You're involved with this corporation. I don't want you to sell your interest to a stranger or a competitor, which is even worse. And without having a proper set of bylaws to govern these circumstances, including the possibility of death or disability of a officer, a key, a director, let's say, somebody who is key to the operations of the business, without having that type of thing going forward, it can end up in chaos in a company. Likewise, when you're dealing with an LLC and it's a single member LLC, well, you don't need a set of rules because there's nobody to argue with but yourself. So you operate your LLC the way you want to operate your LLC. You don't need an operating agreement. The only reason for having an operating agreement for a single LLC, to be quite candid, is that it can cover, at least if it covers, the possibility of the death of the member. How do you pass on that membership interest to a surviving spouse, let's say, or some significant other who you want to have the ownership of that company, and you don't want that company to wither on the vine and have to be dissolved. So this is basically one of the problems with sole proprietorships. I don't like to jump around here, but it just brings it up to mind. I had a client who was a consultant he was a housing consultant, and he was a manager of an apartment complex in Hartford. Goes back a number of years. He never formed a corporation or any entity whatsoever. He just decided to run it on his own in his own name, and he died. And then his wife went to HUD and said, well, I work with my husband all these years. I know what he knows, and I'd like to become the manager. And they said, no, you can't just become the manager. You're going to have to demonstrate a proficiency in the way that your husband did. And you'll have to demonstrate to us that you're capable of being a manager. You just can't fill his shoes. Because the business died with him. When he died, that was the end of the business. And that was the end of his contract with HUD. So you do have this problem with a single member LLC. So it's not a bad idea to have some coverage in the event somebody dies, but it's not quite as necessary, shall we say, as if you have multiple members, because the purpose of the operating agreement for multiple members is very similar to the bylaws. You're going to deal with percentage of ownership. It will spell out John Jones has a 60% ownership interest. Sarah Smith has a 30%. John has the balance, 10%, or that making 100%. And so everybody knows what percentage they own. It will cover the issue of transferring your interest. A lot of operating agreements say no one is allowed to transfer their interest, period. It can go that way. It doesn't have to be that way, but they have a lot of operating agreements that say that. What happens in the event of death, or can you transfer your interest to a trust or to your wife or to your children or whatever have you? That's type of thing that would be covered. Voting would be another matter that would be covered. Raising capital contributions to the LLC, extremely important, because every business starts off with a certain amount of capital. And then let's say, and I've had this happening because people have come to me and said, well, we have an agreement and it says that there were three members, A, B, and C, and each one was responsible for contributing capital in the amount of $50,000. So we have $150,000 in capital. And I remember that what they were doing, they were buying houses, renovating and flipping them. So I said, well, $150,000 for what you're doing may or may not last you very long. I mean, you go out and you buy 3 houses, and then you got $150,000, let's say $50,000 sunk into each of them for the equity portion. The rest of it you borrow. Now you want to buy the 4th. So you go to the members, you say, okay, we didn't need another $50,000 from each of you. And member A says, okay, no problem. Member B says, I've only got $25,000. And member C says, I'm tapped out and I can't put any money in. So now where are you? How do you require the B and C to come up with the rest of their money that they have to come up with? And if you don't cover this in the operating agreement, when you have multiple members, you could run into a major headache in terms of operating your business. So that has to be thought through. And there are a lot of alternatives. You can have A say, I'll put up the money, but I want a bigger share. I'm entitled to a bigger share because I now have a greater investment. And that could be a way of dealing with the issue. Or you could say, if you don't put up your money, then you forfeit your interest and you're out of here. You're no longer a part of this company. Well, go get another somebody. And there's a lot of ways of handling these things, but if nobody thinks of it and nobody bothers to deal with it, then you can find yourself up the creek without having given the proper thought in terms of capital contributions to the company. It's a very, very significant factor. The issue of, Steve, did you have something you want to add? You look like you were on the cusp of asking a question or making a comment. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, just a couple things. This point about the operating agreement is so important, and you gave a good dozen examples there of something to think about. And I've had a number of clients who even have a 50-50 ownership of a business, and nobody wants to think about what could happen if a business dissolves or gets sold, or God forbid somebody passes away. But it's really important to protect the business and your personal interests with an operating agreement. So I'm glad you went deep on this one. Marty, a question that comes up a lot from my clients that I wanted to talk a little bit further on is the concept of an LLC versus an SCorp. And a lot of times a client will say to me, what should I set up? And I always tell them an LLC is the way to go. And I think while the tax treatment from an LLC and an SCorp are very similar, if not exactly the same, you raised some really good important points about if you have a corporation, you are required to have things like officers, articles of incorporation, shareholder meetings, all sorts of administrative corporate type things that have to be documented that with an LLC you generally don't need to do. Is that a good description of it?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Steve, with that. It's all the formalities that I call it of having a corporation that including issuing stock certificates and restricting the stock. I always would restrict the stock and dealing with the Securities Act of 1933 about transferring an interest. And then you sometimes end up with securities problems going down the road. There are so many issues that come up with corporations that are beyond the average person who wants to start a small business. And I think it should be pointed out, and a lot of people don't understand this, you could start with an LLC, and in Connecticut, it is possible to convert to a corporation if you want to. Now, I had a few years ago, just before I retired, we had a partnership that wanted to be an LLC. And so what we did is we ended up doing a conversion. The partners voted and they filed a type of certificate with the Secretary of State that was a conversion and converted over to the LLC. So they didn't have to stop the business. They didn't have to stop operations. They just mechanically went ahead and converted it from one entity to another entity. In Connecticut, you can go from a corporation to an LLC, vice versa, an individual to an LLC or a corporation. It's very, very flexible. You just have to follow the statutory requirements, of course, but it's very flexible. So why not start out and make it easier for yourself? And if things grow and you find, well, my goodness, we're going to be a national company here. We're doing $10 million worth of business. We don't want to be an LLC anymore, or we're going international, which is very important. I always tell people, if you're going to go international with your business, form a corporation, because a lot of people in the foreign countries are not familiar with LLCs. That's an American invention. It's not a European invention or an African invention, and so on. So and so on. So get your corporation done. You might as well bite the bullet and get it done if you're going to become, let's say, an exporter or an importer of wines or goods. Get it done. So you don't have to bother with the conversion, because it's another expense that you don't need. So otherwise, as I say, the entity of choice these days is the LLC, because of the lack of formalities. It's a lot easier to deal with, and you get the same liability protection. That's what people want. They want to be protected from liability, personal liability we're talking about. They don't want to be sued by a consumer. Not that it doesn't happen, by the way. And not that it doesn't happen because people are foolish enough to sign promissory notes or personally guarantee obligations. You're going to get sued if you personally do that. A lot of times your landlord is going to say, I need a guarantee on this lease. Well, if you sign the guarantee, then you're personally liable, no matter whether you have a corporation, LLC, or anything else. You're not going to be protected against your own personal guarantee. Otherwise, when you're dealing with vendors, you're dealing with the consuming public who you're not contracting with, or even if you are, it's you're protecting yourself from personal liability, which is the name of the game here, if it's at all possible. Again, just to finish up with this tip 5, the operating agreement, like the bylaws, is going to help prevent litigation and disputes that can lead to litigation. And so if it's at all possible, it has to be drawn normally by an attorney. Well, I've had people, they go and they get a form. They don't really know what the form tells them, whether it's a good form or a bad form. They just see a form online. So I think this is one time when it makes sense to go to a lawyer. Some people are using, what is it, Zoom? I should know what it is, but it's an online company that forms your corporation and your LLC. There are some people that are willing to spend that kind of money. But once again, I've read some of these documents, and if you really got a significant investment to make, I would have an attorney do it because it's local. And these companies that do these are drafting documents that are not particularly local, and they may miss out. I'm not knocking them. Words of the wise would be stick with a local attorney who knows the law in the state of Connecticut. If we have a few minutes, I think we do, before I address questions. Unless we could do I have a couple of bonus tips that are heretofore unrevealed by me, but just a couple of minutes, just a couple of things. A lot of people form entities to protect themselves, and then they sign a contract, John Jones owner. That is a total no-no. You just cannot do that because that does not eliminate personal liability. The idea here is to prevent yourself from being sued. So the way to sign any kind of a document when you're an entity, if you're a corporation, it would be ABC Inc. by John Jones, its president. If you're an LLC, ABC LLC by John Jones, a member. LLCs have members. Corporations usually have officers, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. Those are the typical offices in a corporation. So you have to be an authorized individual. So you sign the name of the entity first, that was usually printed, and then you put down your signature, and after your signature, its president or a member will solve your problem, and you can keep you out of a lot of trouble. And the last one that I wanted to mention has to do with, if it's possible, after you have formed your entity and you're ready to start business, go to your local bank that you're going to be making you're going to have your checking account anyway, and talk to the bank about a line of credit, commercial line of credit. It could be $25,000, it could be $50,000, it could be $100,000 if you qualify. The bank is only going to look to your credit. The bank is not going to look to the credit of the entity because the entity really has no credit. So if you have decent credit and you set up a line of credit with the lender that the bank that you have your account in, if you find yourself short of funds, can't make payroll, or you have an unexpected repair, or you have some vendor that wants cash up front in order to be able to acquire something, that line of credit can be your safety location where it's safe for you to go. But you have to remember, you want to repay that as quickly as possible. So the way the line of credit works is that you can borrow and repay and borrow and repay and borrow and repay during the course of usually 1 year. At the end of the year, you have to be out of the bank for 30 days, which means you have to pay the loan in full. Then you can go back in and you could do the same thing for the next year and thereafter and thereafter and thereafter. If it's at all possible, it's a wonderful safety net to have, so you don't find yourself out of capital and you have no place to turn, and then your creditors start chasing you and it's a downward spiral. So the only other way of approaching this is with a term loan, which normally runs 3 to 5 years. You make monthly payments, and you can't borrow and repay and borrow and repay. You have to you borrow the money, they give you the money, you get it all. If you're borrowing 25,000, you get the 25,000. And by the way, on the commercial line, you only pay interest on the money you borrow, not on the commitment that the lender makes that we will loan you up to, let's say, $50,000. You borrow 10, you pay interest on 10. Whereas when you borrow money under a term loan, the bank gives you all the money, and then you got to pay it back with interest, however the interest rate is worked out. And I think that brings us to, looks to me like 1:45. I'd love to hear some questions if there are some from our audience.
We do have a few questions that have come in the chat, and I'll just when I get to those, just to offer up to folks, if you have a question, you can either type it in the chat at the bottom of the screen. You see a little chat button, click on that and you can type your question. Or if you want to, if you click on the raise hand button, I can unmute your microphone and you can ask the question directly. Just to reemphasize Marty's point about the financing, the line of credit is so much more preferable to the term loan because you only borrow what you need. And like Marty said, the most important thing is you only pay interest on the amount you have outstanding. A lot of other folks will do, if they have a hard time getting a line of credit directly from the bank for their business, they might take out a home equity loan. If you've got enough equity in your home to do that, to tap into your home as a way, it's kind of another line of credit, another kind of way to get some financing. So Marty, two questions have come in. Crystal has asked your comment about not needing an EIN for a single member LLC. Crystal asked, don't you need an EIN to get a business account? I'm assuming she means a business bank account. You know the answer to that?
The answer is no. You only need a social security number.
Okay.
Some banks will ask you, I can tell you this. I mean, I've told people that before you go down to the bank to open up your checking account, call up the bank and ask the bank, what do they want you to bring in? Your certificate of organization, the receipt from the Secretary of State, on and on and on. And they're trained to ask you for an EIN number because they don't really, that's their training, okay? But the reality is that if you were opening up a personal checking account, you'd have your social security number. This is a disregarded entity. All you have to do is give them your social security number and they should accept it.
Okay, good. Tom had a question about filing a certificate for trade names or a DBA. And his question is, do you need to file a separate certificate of trade names or DBA for each brand name or unique business offering operating under a single LLC? American Brands LLC, for example, a clothing line, Tom's Clothing, Jay's Toys, Bill's Food and Wine, etc. So I guess the question becomes, at what level do you need to file those certificates with your local or state organization?
Okay, well, it's actually a very good question because to clarify, the only name that requires a certificate of trade name is the name of the business. If you develop brands that you are selling, let's say, under your trade name, then you should be thinking about trademarking the brands. And we didn't talk too much about that, and it kind of gives me a jumping off point to mention that I've talked about everything but how the business owner can protect their trademarks. Okay, the way to protect your trademark, you could have a trade name and you could have brand names. There, you have let's say clothing, T-shirts, very commonly, and they have a name for the T-shirts. What you would do normally is if you're going to be interested in national protection, you would file an application with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office for either a trademark if you are selling products or a service mark if you're selling services. So they're all under the general heading of trademarks, yes, but there in fact are distinctions between trademarks for products and service marks for services. And as long as you are eligible, which basically means you have to be conducting business in interstate commerce. You can't just do this if you're a Connecticut company. You can file what is known as an intent to use application. And after you get it granted, you got 6 months or a year to go and use it, in fact, and get your trademark. So I don't want to get into the weeds too much here, but that would be a way of protecting what this is Tom, is that who asked the question?
Mm-hmm.
What Tom asked, the way to protect your brands, that's protecting the brands. The reason for the trade name certificate is not to protect the business owner, it's to protect the consuming public. So all you really need to worry about is filing the trade name of the business itself, not of any products that you might be selling. I hope that answers his question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Let's see. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions? If so, you can click on the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen and I can unmute your microphone. And while we see if there's any other questions, if you joined a little bit late, just to tell you a little bit about SCOR, we're a nationwide organization. We offer mentoring services, workshops, and webinars like this one. And we have a number of resources on our website. I think what I forgot to mention at the beginning is the most important aspect of our mentoring services is that they're free. We are made up of a nationwide organization of volunteers. We do this because we love helping small business owners start businesses and grow their businesses. It's an important data point I probably forgot to mention at the beginning. So if you are interested in learning more about SCOR and signing up for mentoring services and getting your questions answered, whether it's related to this topic or anything else, we have mentors. We have about 50 mentors in our chapter, but we also have a national network that we can tap into for expertise in any kind of industry or any kind of expertise that we don't have locally. But we've got a number of people who've got expertise in legal, financial, marketing, sales and operations. If you name it, we can pretty much find someone to help you out. But you can go to SCOR.org, which is our nationwide website, or you can go to greaterhartford.score.org, which is our local one, and you can select find a mentor, fill out the small form, send it in with your question, and we can get you paired up with somebody. So Marty, we did just get another question. Let's see here. Lanaya, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Lanaya said, I recently got my LLC through LegalZoom. I'm a single member business owner who has not officially launched my business yet. When do I have to file my taxes, and can I use my Social Security instead of the EIN?
Well, if she has an EIN, and I've had many clients who have told me I already have an EIN, I basically told them to disregard the EIN if they're a single member LLC with no employees. Those are the two criteria: single member, no employees. And the tax returns are due just like individual tax returns. You file, once a year. I recommend that unless people are highly experienced with dealing with federal and state returns, that you hire I think it should be a CPA. I like to have people use CPA. It's a good way to get started because then you're dealing with tax issues potentially, as well as the nuts and bolts of filing documents, filing important tax documents with the state and federal government. So the other thing with LLCs, which is why if you can disregard, if you don't have to have the EIN, is you don't have to get involved. Maybe you do. I'm thinking about filing quarter returns. I think you have, no matter what, if you're an LLC, you're going to have to file a quarter return. So I'll take that back. I had an idea, but I realized it doesn't really make any sense. But I think that the important point to understand is that you're just going to file your tax returns when you normally are obligated to file tax returns for an individual. I don't think there's any difference.
Right, and I'm not a CPA, but I've worked in the accounting field for a number of years, so don't take this as the gospel. But you are going to be required to make quarterly estimated payments. to both the IRS and the Connecticut Department of Revenue, if you're required to. If you don't make quarterly estimated payments throughout the year, when you file your taxes in April of the following year, you might be subject to interest and penalties because you underpaid your taxes throughout the previous calendar year.
I think
So,
you hit the nail on the head, Steve, on that one.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
the way I explain it to folks is when you're working for a large corporation and they're taking your withholding out of your paycheck every week or every 2 weeks, and they send that money to the IRS and they send that money to the Connecticut Department of Revenue, that's your estimated tax payment. Your employer is doing that for you.
yes,
If you're a business owner and you're earning money on that business, you have to do that yourself. And that's the quarterly estimated tax payment process.
well,
I-
that was where I was heading. I started thinking that if it's a multiple member, but it really doesn't make any difference. Single,
Right.
multiple, it's an LLC, and that's the obligation of the LLC.
Right.
So-
And the way the taxes work for an LLC owner is the income is reported on the owner of the LLC's tax return, is kind of the way it works. So that person is obligated for that tax liability. Marty's comment about working with a CPA is music to my ears because I always tell my clients, I know you're usually bootstrapping to fund your business and expenses are always tight. But if there's anything to spend money on, it is a CPA to help you navigate the tax law and make sure you get everything done on time and correctly. You don't have to worry about interpreting tax laws, pay them to do it. And a business attorney, if you've got something where you need to set up an operating agreement or you've got something complex that you're entering into depending upon your business. Those are two experts that you can hire that will save you so much time. I tell my clients, I'd much rather have you out trying to meet with customers, sell your product, developing a marketing strategy, and delivering a great product or service to your customers instead of worrying about trying to understand the tax code. Hire somebody to do that and spend the money. It's a good use of money.
Well, I have we have a few minutes, so I have maybe a story that might be of interest to our audience as well as to you, Steve. But I had a client a number of years ago who came to me. He wanted to buy a franchise, and franchise disclosure documents are sort of like a small telephone book. They're hundreds of pages long, and they have the disclosure document, they have the contracts, they have maybe the leases, financial statements, cross references. It goes on and on and on. And one of the things that I did often was review franchise disclosure documents for clients who were thinking about buying a franchise. So we went through before I went through it, he said to me, look, I graduated college. I got a master's degree in philosophy. I'm very well read. Do I really need a lawyer to review this? I understand the English language. I can read everything. I said, well, sometimes you may think you understand the word, but it has a legal significance and you may overlook it, and that can get you into trouble. I said, sometimes. I'm not going to say that's the case with you. So I went through his entire document. And at the end of the day, because you have accounting background, you'll appreciate this, Steve, in particular. At the end of the day, it said that annually the franchisee had to provide audited financial statements for the franchisor. Audited. So I said to him, look, this is going to cost you $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a year to have an audit done. It's going to cost you all this money. If you can go back to the franchisor and say, get rid of the word audited, just put down reviewed or compiled, something, you'll save yourself a bundle. So he went back and the franchisor agreed on it.
That's
a
good.
year later, he came back to me and he said, Marty, we had a franchisees convention and everybody was comparing notes. And everybody was complaining about the auditing fees that they were paying. And you pointed out, and I said, isn't it interesting? One word out of 10,000 or 20,000 words, I was able to pick up. I mean, I'm very happy I was able to do it. I picked up and saved you all this money.
That's
so
great.
That's the benefit of having an attorney And it just so happened that it worked out well for me and for him.
It's a
So I
it's a
thought,
great example. We got one more question here that we have time for. Crystal
good.
just asked
Great.
about single member LLC is attached to your personal income tax. She says I can get I don't know if that's an LLC number. If I don't, or person that, all right. So the way to think about now, again, I'm gonna tell you, this is not considered professional tax advice. You should really consult with a professional CPA to get the what's applicable for your specific business. But generally, the way it works is if you earned, $50,000 a year at your job and your business earned $50,000 as an LLC and you were the only owner of that LLC, you were the single member LLC, you would report $100,000 of income on your tax return because you got $50,000 from your employer and you got $50,000 as the owner of that LLC business, and you would pay taxes on that $100,000 on your personal tax return. Generally speaking, that's how it works. Every situation could have, exceptions to that, but that's the general kind of way to think about it.
That's what Schedule C is for. It's just a
Right.
separate schedule that you attach with all the information on it. If you
Right.
do that, then you're in good shape as long as the information is accurate. Obviously,
Yeah.
you're all set.
Yeah, the way to think about it is the IRS or the state of Connecticut is going to get taxes on the income one way or the other. The LLC as an entity doesn't pay taxes. It's
Correct.
the income from the LLC goes to the owner, and the owner pays taxes on that income on their tax return. So either way, they're going to get their share
Yeah.
of that. So
I mean, that's why they're referred to as pass-through entities. The
correct. Yep.
income passes through. If you think of it that way, it's like a sieve. It just passes right through to the owner.
Great. All right, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Marty, thank you very much. This was excellent. I want to thank everybody for their great questions. And again, if there's any help you need with your business, that if you think SCOR can be of resource, check us out at scor.org. Click the Find a Mentor section. Fill out the form. It's not a lot of information we need. Most importantly, be specific about what help you need with. And what we will do is we will match you up with the mentor that's got that right expertise to help answer your questions. Thanks again, everybody, for joining, and take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thank you, Steve, for your help.
Take care.
Yep. Take care.